years.
Yeah.
So those guys never, the political people never did anything, and I for a long time, and I had to go and get make my own deal. I went up to see Corzine, make my own deal, and
George, I start doing a little bit of work for George, and next thing I have to go over and buy $900 in tickets for the Democratic fundraiser. I had to do this, I had to do that, and it just got.
Yeah, it gets silly.
Okay. Let me ask you first, if the photographer wants to reach you, what would be the best number for him to call?
215-238-0100.
0100.
And what's
We just need to get this done. I would say it's Jeremy Messler, and we probably need to get this done before Tuesday of next week, if possible.
Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. He'll call you.
Well,
We'll do it Monday.
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Because we wanted to get a professional photographer. Because, to capture your masculinity, your good looks, we want to make sure we get.
Most importantly, what's your handicap?
12.
He's a good 12.
Yeah, good 12. We got to set this up.
Oh yeah.
I'm a bad 8. So.
You don't lose many tournaments with Larry at 12.
Joe and I played in the Galloway Member Guest a couple weeks ago. We were leading it after the first day, and that was the end of that. The second day was not too good to us. All right. Well, we're obviously thrilled, Larry, that you agreed to this. Thanks so much. Maybe we'll just start out with some background information. Where you're from originally.
I'm from West Philadelphia.
West Philly.
Lived there till I was 17.
Okay.
And when I was 24, now 23, I went to New York and came back in 67. I was 25 when I came back. I was in New York for 3 years.
What were you doing up there?
I was an agent. I worked for a couple of theatrical agencies that got bookings for entertainers.
And this was after you left Temple?
I left. Yeah, I left Temple in 65 to go to New York to get a job in New York.
Okay. And what brought you to that business? What prompted you to go to New York or get into that business?
When I was in Temple, I got a job. A part-time job after school with a disc jockey that I had met when I was in high school, and he had a small trade newspaper for radio stations, and he decided he wanted to do a teenage newspaper, and he hired me. And I was a communications major at Temple, and through that I started to meet some bands. I had a friend of mine, a fellow that I had met that had become a friend, and he had just transferred from Penn to Temple, but he still was a social member at his fraternity at Penn and was looking for a band, and asked me did I know any bands, as I was working for this jockey, and I got a band, and I started, from that I started booking bands and fraternities, and then to nightclubs and then concerts, and I felt that I needed to learn more. I had a job. I had a couple of jobs offered to me, and I took one, and I left school to go to New York, figuring you go to school to learn something, to get a job, and I figured, well, is my.
You learn a lot more.
You know, I learned a lot more. I'll finish school some other time, and I went to New York and then worked there for 3 years, and had a great education, and I came back to Philly.
How did you make your original contacts booking bands? I mean, how did you network your way into finding out who the bands were and what?
Well, as a kid, I had what I would consider a feel for music. Just one of those things in entertainment. You know, some people have an affinity towards whatever. And whatever. I mean, that you would gravitate towards that. And for me, it was entertainment. And I think it might have been. I mean, the first material thing we ever had is TV in 1950, and I was mesmerized by TV, and then you had a lot of variety shows, and then dance shows for kids, and then music, on the radio, and I was just totally engulfed in it. So it was easy for me to make those connections once I was it became available to me. And then from one band, you meet another band, and then they find you because we had a lot of R&B bands, and there were groups like Lee Andrews and the Hearts who had a number of hits in the past, and weren't on the national circuit, but were looking to stay alive, looking to make money. And I booked them for a while, and then there was another group, that the Times, who had a few hit records, and I booked a lot of shows for them.
The Andrews and the Hearts was one of my all-time favorite.
Yeah, it was a great R&B group, had a lot of big hits, and then groups between tours or like the Times, they lived here, had to work, so colleges were easy for them, and these guys had bands, and then there were some other up and coming groups. I had a guy, I think maybe the first group, or one of the first groups I ever booked was a guy named Brooks O'Dell, and he had a band called the Majestics, and they were great. They were great live performing bands, and it was perfect for the time. Go into fraternity and have a good time. And then there was a guy from my neighborhood that I had grown up with, named Len Barry, who had a few hits when he was with a group called the Dovells, and he left the group, and I helped him get started. I kept him working in bands and clubs in the area, but not only in the area. We booked. I booked bands up and down the East Coast, and out to Pittsburgh, and down through Maryland and Virginia. So that one fraternity, one school would find out about this band. How do you get this band? And, you had a business card. You went to a fraternity. One kid went to visit somebody in Penn State. He was from the University of Maryland. Yeah. And then I got a mailing list, and I put it together and sent out a mailer, and then I started booking concerts, different schools, and I got a call from the Air Force Academy, and I booked Dick Gregory out there. And
Dick Gregory, the
comedian. It was very hot at the time.
Yeah.
And
this was, I'm sorry, this was by who?
The Air Force Academy. And I booked a lot of shows at local colleges as well. I started to book concerts, and I realized at some point that there was somebody else that I had to learn from. There was another process, and I felt by taking this job in New York that would enable me to get access and information and knowledge from another source, and I'd see where it took me. And as it turned out, it took me back to Philadelphia, where for some reason I felt in my mind that it was important for me to have success here in my hometown.
So as this whole process evolved, especially while you were in college, it had to be an incredibly exciting time to realize that this was all happening and coming true, and what you really wanted to be involved with, and then when people start reaching out to you to find out what you could do for them, I mean, you could see where it could really take off.
You know what was great about it? I was making money, doing something that I liked doing. And I think that's everybody has a different value of things and a different mindset of how to go about things. When I first went to college, first college I went to was Philadelphia Textile. Only because that was the only school I could get into, and I played ball there for a little while, and then, but I was
basketball.
Yeah, I played for a freshman team.
Far before the Herb Magid days.
I guarded Herb Magid.
Did you really? Oh wow!
Just to make Herbie look a lot better.
Ken went to Memphis State on a basketball scholarship.
I did not play high school football. I went to Memphis State on a basketball scholarship and wound up switching to football.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So you went to textile.
And only because, again, it was the only school I could get into, probably, because my friends were going there. I never planned to go to school or do anything, but high school to me was a big party because we didn't have a lot of money. My sister was brighter than me, and I thought that if anybody went to school, it would have been her. And it turned out my father passed away my senior year in high school, and I got a VA allowance to go to school. My father had been in the men's clothing business, so I figured, well, I'll go there. I'll learn that business. I'll get a job. My father, people like my father. I figured, that would be a great situation. And then I realized, as any kid trying to find their way, that it wasn't an exciting proposition. I met a guy that my dad worked for, and he said, well, when you get out of college, we'll give you a job, we'll hire you, give you a job for $5,000 a year. And that stuck with me. I'm going to go to college for 4 years. I'm going to work my ass off. And then I'm going to get a job for $100 a week. Geez, it doesn't sound so interesting. Of course, it was 1960. So a year later, I transferred to Temple, and I decided I would follow.
That's right. This is count. That's why I have that backup. That's why.
So I just figured I'd follow that and see where it led me. At least it's something that I liked, and if I was going to do anything, in life, at least since I had such a good time in high school, I figured I'd continue that. And I had a good time in college. Not a great student, but good in what I was in my major, and then when I was booking all these bands, I had a couple of people offer me jobs, and that was pretty exciting. And then to go to New York, and finally break away from home and just say, this is it. Take that leap of faith. It's great.
Now, as a novice, I'm sure you skinned your knees and had to pay your dues. I'm sure there were some legalities that arose that are about maybe getting paid, or so you're really learning on the run here, right?
Learned everything on the run, and was bright enough to know that I didn't know enough. And if I had not gone to New York, the chances are I would have been that guy booking fraternity parties, booking concerts. There were no promoters, real promoters around that were interested in this sort of thing, and I might have got stuck in that. And I started working when I started working. It was just me and a telephone in my bedroom, and doing everything, going on the road, carrying equipment, collecting the money, paying the bands, paying the acts, going to nightclubs. There were times where I was just hanging out in nightclubs, trying to learn, trying to make that connection or to the next thing, trying to meet people, and trying to be very cool about it. Not trying to be too obvious, but just trying to do all those things. So when the opportunity came up, it wasn't really a hard decision. It was I had the last year in Philadelphia. I had worked for a company called Music Associates that booked society bands, but it had a structure to it. I had no structure before that. And
So what was the name of the company?
Music Associates. And they had bands that played weddings and bar mitzvahs and country clubs, but not having, not being able to rely on my father for guidance and structure. I was really only relying on myself and just the knowledge that I picked up. And growing up in West Philly was really good for me because I gained a lot of street smarts, and it was that type of neighborhood, blue collar, working class, row home neighborhood where everybody was in the same situation. So hanging on the corner or wherever you hung with the guys gave you that sort of street sense. That was actually a great school, the corner, or wherever you hung with other guys. Down here, we used to hang on the beach at Chelsea Beach in Atlantic City when we were in high school and college. And when we got to college, a lot of us got jobs, worked here for the summers, different things. I was a busboy and a waiter here for a couple of years, and so having those street smarts, you start to be able to navigate different things, but you have to be smart enough to know that there's some place that you have to go to learn more, and you have to learn from other people that are more successful than you in business. So I went from being the only white guy in a black nightclub at 3 a.m. waiting to get paid to working in New York. To working it with I worked the first agency I worked for was a small company where I met a lot of interesting people, some young people and some veterans, and then was fortunate enough to get a job at the biggest agency in the country. General Artists Corporation, and we had everybody from the Beatles to Dylan, Tom Jones, to newer acts like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Frank Zappa.
Some of those names: Dylan, Beatles, Tom Jones, Frank Zappa,
Tom Jones, the Supremes,
Hendrix.
and then we had younger acts like Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Frank Zappa, who were just beginning. And I worked there for 18 months. I couldn't have gotten a better education. I worked for some interesting people. Actually, my two bosses were actually started the contemporary concert business with an act they discovered when they got out of the service, the Kingston Trio. They sold their company to this big company, and they hired me.
So now you leave this agency after 18 months and you come back to Philadelphia?
I lived in New York for 3 years total, and I came back to Philly. And hooked up with Spivak Brothers, who owned the Jazz nightclub, Showboat, where I would come to Philly and hang out. Working at the smaller agency, we represented a lot of jazz, big jazz. People in the clubs a lot. We went down and we had Miles Davis, and Stan Getz, and Art Blakey, and Bill Evans, and I became friendly with some of the jazz acts, and I liked going to jazz clubs. I had always gone. At that time in Philly, it was easy to get into clubs, even though you were still in high school. The club owners were little lenient, and so I would always, when in school, I'd wind up going to jazz clubs and nightclubs, and a friend of mine, father, was one of the maitre d's at the Latin Casino. So all through high school and college, I got to see these giant acts. It was all a learning process. So I came back to Philly, hooked up with the Spivak Brothers, who wanted to go they started doing jazz concerts and were very successful, but they saw that the money for them was in the white concert business with rock acts and contemporary acts. And some information, and push came to shove. We started talking about how to get into this business, and my suggestion was open up a club, play the new contemporary acts that are starting to break, like Hendrix and Joplin and Reed, we represented, and I knew they were starting to make a little noise, and push came to shove. 8 months later, we opened the Electric Factory, and that put us on the map. And within a short period of time, we had a strong national reputation, and we'd started doing shows at the Spectrum that had opened up a couple of months before.
So all of your shows weren't at the facility. You did book other shows in other
we started doing concerts in September of 1969.
67.
We opened the factory in 68. We started doing concerts in 69. And there were other promoters that had gone into the spectrum that had failed miserably, big acts, and just didn't know the city, didn't know how to promote in the city. They just had access to get acts, and they had the money. So after they failed, we started doing some shows, and we were successful. And other people would still come in and do shows. And they weren't successful, and we were.
Why do you think that was? Why, if a band has national reputation, what could you provide in the city that would make a difference between making a concert successful or not?
Well, there were a few things. The first thing was trust. I think we gained people's trust. We knew the city. The promoters that had come in were from out of the city. And we formed our own alliances. We hung our own posters. We did everything. And we created a feel for what we were doing, but we had been in the club. We had succeeded against great odds. We had a big problem with Police Commissioner Rizzo and the city of Philadelphia. We won, and that. Even though they put us through a lot of strain and stress and financial problems, we were able to overcome with the help of some really incredible lawyers and we had a lot of support not only in our music community but with politicians, neighbors, businessmen that were taken back by the city wanting to close up our club.
What do you think that was? What was Rizzo's issue with what you were doing?
It was not only Rizzo. It was the mayor.
Who was the mayor at the time?
James Tate. Just a complete mistrust and of younger people.
Younger people.
And dislike for the counterculture or the anti-establishment point of view of these kids that were sweeping the country. It was during the Vietnam War,
Right.
and the draft, which obviously there were a lot of people opposed to. Our club became a rallying point, not a conscious rallying point, but we were the main promoters, local promoters at that time. The club did not cost a lot to get into. We gave people a good show. The environment was totally their environment. We didn't have a lot of rules. We let people do drugs. Uh,
What specifically? What years were these? Were these
68, February 68.
Now, you mentioned drugs. What?
I don't have any on me.
What? Well, the only drugs I'm interested in now are painkillers,
Yeah.
like ibuprofen. But
Tell me about it.
what? So that was part of that culture back then. And,
Yeah.
But you were able to keep your club probably
Well,
as
we
relatively
were-
clean as possible. There was no open marijuana smoking, I
None.
would assume, in the
None.
concerts.
None.
How did you police it?
It wasn't that big. We had our own security force. We had guys in karate outfits.
Really?
Yeah.
Security?
Right there. Okay. That's all right.
See, you had guys in karate outfits working as security guards?
Yeah, they were. We realized that we needed to keep an eye on things. We also had University of Pennsylvania football players that we hired. And they weren't really obvious. I mean, we just that was the policy, and people pretty much respected that. Doesn't mean that they didn't come in high. And didn't do anything but inside they knew that it was, that. And then what happened is that when Rizzo came in, they vowed to close us, and they would bring. We did 2 shows a night, 8 and 10:30, and there was a curfew that nobody under I think 17 or younger could be out after 10:30 at night. So now we're having a show that starts 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. It was 8 and 11. So now kids, now they're looking for curfew violators, just as a harassment, and looking for any possible drugs in the place. They found 22, what they said were 22 known drug users or dealers. None of them only one of them was ever arrested. Nobody was ever convicted. And of course, when we went to court, we had a great constitutional lawyer, Stanford Schmuckler, and we fought on constitutional grounds. And the city would try to trump up everything, but they had really no hard facts. But the trial dragged on and on. And it was obvious that we had presented a pretty good defense. And on election day in 1970, there was a little article on the last page that won the case. Meanwhile, we had headlines. We were on the front page. There were editorials being written for months, and the trial dragged on, and then we didn't hear anything. And of course, election day, all of a sudden, the back pages. And then, but by that time, we realized that if we were going to make it in the business, we had to make it doing concerts. We had started doing shows at the Spectrum. The audience grew, and it wasn't just the hippies or the music community or the political activists that were coming, or people that were fighting the Vietnam War. It was everybody. The music became accessible to everybody, and the acts started to want more money. We were only charging $3 to $4 to get into the club, Uh, Not that we weren't charging a lot more for concerts. We charged $5.50 or $6 for concerts. Gave them a great middle 3 acts. We did shows. We were doing 40 to 60 shows within a very short period. It took 40 to 60 shows a year. Nobody was doing arena shows in the beginning.
These are 40 to 60 arena shows you're
Right,
running?
40 to 60 arena shows, and then we did shows at the Academy of Music and Irvine Auditorium, and we started getting calls to do shows out of town. We did a lot of shows all around. I mean, we would go down to New Orleans, and, little towns in Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana. We went to Shreveport, went through the Virginias. Doing different shows, New England. There weren't a lot of promoters, and there weren't a lot of defined territories. So, if you knew what you were doing, knew the music, and had a couple of bucks, you take a chance. And we had so much success doing shows at the Spectrum. And what happened was Jerry Wallman, who originally had the Spectrum, who we originally made deals with, and it was easier to make deals once everybody started to fail. All the other out-of-town promoters started to fail. Wallman lost the Spectrum. We went into receivership. We dealt with the bank. I think it was Judge Harvey Schmidt. We made a deal with him. Ed Snyder took it out of receivership, asked us to continue doing shows as part of his program. We made more money than the Flyers or the Sixers combined in those days. We kept that building afloat. I mean, obviously the Flyers had won a couple of championships and started drawing well, and then just little by little the Sixers came. We still did over a period of years. We would do 45, 50 shows a year through every year, and we did it for. Did it till I left Live Nation about a year and a half ago.
Wow. I want to get one more question about the drug use. You were able to police
It wasn't hard.
the attendees, but what about the bands?
Well, the same would go for the bands. We didn't have dressing rooms per se. Usually the band came and went. And any business that they did, or any, there was no catering or backstage, anything. So they would come to the show, play, and then leave. And then the dressing rooms that we did have were very small. A lot of the bands would use our office for a dressing room. They weren't changing any clothes.
Right.
And the same thing would apply if there were any drug use. It wasn't at the club. It was before or after.
Because when you're dealing with the Joplins and the Hendrixes and everything, that was
Yeah.
part of their deal. So.
They, whatever they did, the only thing that you would ever see is Janis Joplin would bring in a bottle of Southern Comfort, or she'd ask for a bottle of Southern Comfort. That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. I don't remember anybody ever asking for any booze. And bands, there weren't bands that would ask you for for drugs. First of all, those connections were made before they had come, or earlier, or outside. Those people, they knew, anybody who was doing anything, they knew what the maneuver was. And if anybody asked us, that wasn't. We never bought or supplied anybody with any drugs or any never got any girls for anybody. Never. They were the two things we never did. We just did our business, and people respected.
Would other promoters do that type
Sure.
of thing?
Sure.
And did that hinder you in getting some of these bands?
No, we had such a great reputation. Philadelphia had, because of the early days at the club and the early days at the Spectrum, where we were really creating we were the first big play. We did more shows, including Madison Square Garden. When they played New York, they might play the Fillmore or someplace else. In Philly, we put a show together at the Spectrum, a 3-act show at the Spectrum, and the bands made a lot of money at that time. So we had a great reputation. When they went to San Francisco, they were playing 5,000 seats. We were at 20,000 seats the deal. So it was a cool play out in San Francisco. You could play Winterland, but it was basically 4,000 to 5,000. We were selling 4,000 to 5,000 tickets. We were trying to sell 20, and we had more success than anybody in the entire country. Because of our knowledge, and B, because of the accessibility of the building, because other people hadn't been successful, and it's like anything, how you know anything. If you're we just knew the city, and we just knew and the area, and we had close relationships with record companies and agents and managers and radio stations. Remember, radio stations basically were starting out playing that music around the same time. When we started, WMMR was a part-time station. They played contemporary music 4 hours a day. That's all.
What'd they do the rest of the time?
Not anything that I remember that was interesting. I don't think they were playing music. And then the WXPN was a college station that very few people listened to, but there were a couple of stations. In fact, one time I worked at a radio station when the factory was closed one summer. I worked there as a disc jockey. The interesting thing was that we would answer our own phones. So if somebody called asking for information or directions, you got to talk to that person on the phone. And when you weren't around, there were live people, the secretaries, and the secretaries were people that were going to the shows, women in their early to mid 20s that just were pretty hip, and you got to talk to people, and there were people that would call you about different things. So when you put a show on sale, you were actually talking to a kid. I would come in on Saturday when we would put shows on sale just to talk on the phone. I hear people. I'd come over at nighttime for an hour or two, or stay after work just to talk to people on the phone. We'd call. It was an interesting thing, and that's how how we got to know a lot.
Tell me, I'm sorry.
And just it wasn't like you had a job. It was like you had this completely engulfed you. So it started early in the morning and went to late at night. And the first 100 days that we were open 98 out of 100 days. The first 3.5 months out of the first 100 days, we were open 98 days, working day and night, and then talking on the phone and doing everything, open open on Sundays. I remember it was pretty crazy. I'm sure I had a nice meltdown. Because you're working every day
Right.
and every night.
What about some of the personalities that you dealt with in the entertainment business? Any, people that you remained close to over the years, or any interesting insights
Well,
to any
when you
particular?
start out, everything's brand new for everybody. Everything's brand new for everybody. The acts,
Mickey,
yeah,
say hello.
promoters, agents. It was a brand new thing. So there were bound to be difficulties. And then as young people will do when they have some success, start to make demands, just like a pretty girl. People were vying for their attention, and there were demands, even if they weren't spoken. But they're just things that you would be expected to do. But you were growing up in a business, and the funny thing is, the acts that lasted, or even the acts that just stuck around, that weren't the primary headliners, but just that kept working, became really nice, understanding people. The wild people that were on drugs, that lasted even to this day. For the singing, it's completely different. It's just, we all grew up together.
Right.
So there were a lot of great personalities and a lot of difficult personalities, but we were difficult too. Just finding our way and having really tunnel vision, because we were just straight on trying to make this business work, and it was just coming after you so quickly that and the demands on our time and attention. And after we had the factory, we had another nightclub called the Bijou Cafe that lasted 10 years, and we're running a nightclub. We're running concerts. We're doing concerts around the country.
I don't know how you had a chance to breathe, to be honest with you.
Well, you try to have a life, and we were all married.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, my wife was pretty understanding and got it through the years. And when we first got married, I explained to her what my vision was and what was going to happen.
How long have you been married?
40 years this past Monday.
And your wife's name is?
Mickey, M-I-C-K-E-Y.
M-I-C-K-E-Y. And kids?
Yeah.
No kids.
Dog, 2 cats, 2 horses. And just an immature husband.
Well, I will say that being involved in an industry that can lead to some temptation, being married for 40 years is a...
There's been an amazing amount of temptations. But going out on the road especially was the loneliest thing. Drugs were so readily available as well. You went to, after a show, everybody went to the bar. Anything could happen at a bar, and you try to pick out the guys that were safer to hang around, hang out with. And
what about personality? I mean, are there any performers that you've remained particularly close with over the years, or who would those be?
Well, Billy Crystal and Bette Midler are close personal friends.
Billy's, how many 700 Sundays was it called? What was it called?
I co-produced Billy's Broadway show.
Well, yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about that. Any other names in particular that
Who
you're
are- who
particularly
I'm friendly
with, or that you stay in touch with? Or,
Geez, there's so many people that were from Nick.
Joe LaGrossa doesn't count.
Joe LaGrossa's in there. We'll get him.
Now, there's entertainers that
Yeah.
I stay in touch with.
I mean, I know you've dealt with McCartney. And,
Yeah. Just
Josh, did you say Josh Groban? His name, nice young man, or something? You said
Robin. No, I'm not really friendly with him. Phil Collins, Genesis.
what?
Springsteen.
There you go.
There's so many.
I'd like to get Bruce Springsteen on the cover of Jersey Man one of these days.
There's so many people that that
Hard to pick them out.
you stay friendly with, and that you can socialize with. But there are just so many. I was very close to Grover Washington Jr. We were close friends. It's just a lot of musicians and actors and people in the business that were extremely close to, agents and managers. But the idea is that through the whole thing, try to have a normal life. And luckily for me, I've been able to maintain, or